Good morning. I'm Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis, Jr., President and CEO of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, representing the Black press of America. We're pleased this morning to be here with the Honorable Senator Jones from Alabama. We're first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
On being the senator from the great state of Alabama. And on behalf of the NNPA, thank you for agreeing to doing this fireside chat.
No, it's my pleasure, my honor. Thank you.
Listen, let's get right to it, Senator Jones. I read something about the impact of the voter turnout.
Mm-hmm.
The House passed the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act.
Right.
Hopefully the Senate will reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. But tell our listeners how important it is to get out the vote, particularly the black vote. And I would just give a shout out to black women who voted
Absolutely.
in such high numbers that contributed to your election.
Well, you know, the right to vote was hard fought for African Americans in this country. And I think too many people, both white and black, take that vote for granted, and they just don't see it as their duty. Sometimes they don't feel, especially in the South, the way things have moved, that their vote doesn't count. Well, their vote does count. I think we proved that clearly in a special election in 2017. Every vote counts. And with that vote, you make a statement about what the importance is, the issues that you're looking for, the issues that people are concerned about on a daily basis that affect their lives. It's not just the biggest picture of national defense and things going on and around the world. It's those kitchen table issues that we talked about, what it means for your job, your education, your health care, which is so important. And I think that in America today, since the Shelby County versus Holder case, we have seen an attack on voting rights. It's not the same as the old Jim Crow laws of, where there's poll taxes and things like that. But there are still efforts out there to suppress votes, to keep people from having the free and fair access to that ballot box. So I think we have to be incredibly vigilant. I am honored to be part of the bill as a co-sponsor of the bill to try to restore some teeth to the Voting Rights Act that case took away. I wish I could say I was optimistic that it would come to the Senate floor, but under the current circumstances and the current makeup of the Senate, I don't really see that happening, which is all the more reason to get out there and vote in these 2020 elections.
Absolutely. I just want to dwell on this subject one more time. Karen Carter Richards is the chair of the National Newspaper Publishers Association, a distinguished publisher from Houston,
Right.
Texas. In fact, my whole executive committee are African American women publishers.
Right.
So I just want you to comment, what role did the black women voters play in Alabama in your election, your success?
Was it a critical role? I mean, we focused on trying to make sure that we got the African American vote out, and we did get a record turnout. As a percentage of the total electorate, we were able to get more African Americans as a percentage out than even President Obama did in his first race in 2008, a fact that I was very, very proud of. The fact that so many in the black community came out, and not only just came out to vote, they really worked hard. They worked their neighbors. In a state like Alabama, we don't have early voting. We don't have mail-in voting except for a very rigorous absentee ballot process. You've got to make an effort to get out to vote between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And that takes a lot. There are lines that you've got to wait in. It's a commitment. And so, people in the churches, in the community, really focused on trying to make sure people understood how important that election was so that we could look forward rather than in the past of Alabama. I think it really sent a bold statement. And the black women especially, but the black community as a whole, made a huge difference in that election. And I expect and hope that they will do so again in 2020.
Well, we're in 2020, and I hope also we're going to work hard with all of the persons running for election across the board, but voter turnout is key.
Absolutely.
And certainly we want to make sure that what happened in Alabama can be replicated this year in 2020 to have the largest black voter turnout across America, not only Alabama, but every state. We want to make sure there's a record black voter turnout, but particularly African Americans, with so much at stake, the quality of life.
Well, we lost the 2016 elections so close. I mean, we won the popular vote, but in some states, we lost just enough to lose the electoral votes. when you look at a race like what happened in Virginia and in Alabama in 2017, and look what happened in Kentucky this year, electing a Democratic governor. John Bel Edwards in Louisiana was reelected. It shows what you can do when people turn out and they understand that their vote really does matter and it makes a difference. And it's the engagement part. We're working on trying to make sure voter suppression is taken care of. But it is a community engagement, and that's a 365 days a year job. It is not just something you can do 30 days before an election. And that's why your organization is so important, because you stay engaged and you keep people engaged, and it's a year-round effort to try to work toward the next election.
Well, and the black press, getting out the vote in 2020 is our top priority.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm a native of North Carolina, and I know that Alabama prides itself for having 14 HBCUs, and we have 15 or 16 in
well,
North
we're just
Carolina.
not going to quibble over the count. I still
That's
think
right.
we get.
And Congresswoman Adams, Alma
Yes.
Adams from Greensboro, helped to get the Futures Act on the House side,
Right.
and you were on the Senate side. Talk about it. And I also work with the National Association for Equal Opportunity in Higher Education, NAFIO, representing all of the HBCUs, the Black College Presidents, with Dr. Leslie Baskerville. How important is the Futures Act that President Trump signed?
Absolutely.
It was a bipartisan piece of legislation, the Futures Act. Tell us, I was so pleased. I understand that the funding now is permanent.
Yes.
For HBCUs. Explain to our listeners today and our viewers today the importance of the Future Act.
Well, it's incredibly important. Remember that when it comes to federal dollars, there's really two pots of money that historically black colleges and universities get. One is a mandatory funding that's generally the same every year, but it expires every so often. There's a separate set of money that's discretionary monies that can go up and down. The mandatory funding that expired in September of this year, we had a bill pending both to give it permanent funding as well as just give us a chance to talk about it for 2 years. That bill is so important because that is the base. That's the base. HBCUs struggle every year. They struggle because they don't have the same endowments that so many other institutions do. They have to keep their tuition reasonable to attract the quality students that they can from underserved communities. So this mandatory funding is absolutely critical for them for every year so that they can plan for the future. They can talk about teachers, they can talk about their infrastructure, and make the plans necessary. At this point now, with what we were able to accomplish in the House and the Senate, and as you said, a very bipartisan way, and it was not easy, it was a struggle. Even though there was bipartisan support, there's a lot of budgetary tugs that fought us a little bit. Other people wanting to get this or that as part of this. But we were just persistent. And I think that's the key in legislation in Washington today, is to be persistent, to make sure that you have members of Congress and the Senate on both sides of the aisle that really are for this. So we were able to get that permanent funding so that at least the base amount of money for HBCUs and other minority serving institutions will be there for years to come. And in addition to that, in my 2 years in the Senate, we have been able to get almost a 30% increase in the discretionary funding. For years, it was 5 or 6 years since discretionary funding for HBCUs had gone up.
Yes.
Last year, we were able to get a 14% increase. This year, it's 15%. That's also very important. And it's a recognition, I think, of the quality of education and the service that these institutions provide to so many students that might otherwise not have an opportunity. We're looking at making sure, because there's so many of the African American population, doctors, lawyers, professionals, engineers, that start their careers at HBCUs. And so providing that base is important to them. It's also important to a state like North Carolina's economy, a state like Alabama's economy. There's something about those institutions more than anything else, I think, that is a cohesive unit for the communities and provide an economic engine for the state. So I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do on that. We've accomplished a lot on it. Still think there's a lot of work to do. As part of our permanent funding, we took a first step that I think is also going to help a lot of students. And that is, we've taken the first step in simplifying that free financial aid application, that FAFSA form.
Yeah, the
Lord
FAFSA.
have mercy. So many people have just walked away from that thing. It's so
I
complicated.
have 8 kids. I've had to fill out that long
Oh,
form.
yeah.
And then if you make a mistake, you have to fill out the whole form
That's
all
right.
over
And then
again.
when they audit you, you have to go back. And so this first step will allow the federal government agencies that have a lot of this information to share that information. Senator Alexander and I have a bill pending now that we hope will get passed this year that will further simplify it down to about 20 questions, 20, right. 25 questions. In Alabama alone, in 2017 or 18, I forget which year, Alabama kids left about $60 million of grant monies on the table. That's grant monies that can go to these kids in these underserved areas, predominantly in the African American communities, that can get these kids the education they deserve. Well,
we want to salute you and thank you for your leadership in the Senate to get the Future Act to the president's desk, and in fact now it's law.
Absolutely.
Thank you. A lot of HBCU students are going to benefit from that. A lot of parents, as you said, it helps the overall welfare, economic condition.
Right.
Of the African American community, but also for the community at large. Different states benefit from the contribution, significant contribution that HBCUs
Absolutely.
make to America. So thank you again, and we're going to continue to cover various aspects of the Future Act in the Black press.
Well, the Future Act is going to help generations. I mean, this is not just something that we've done to do something on a yearly basis. This is going to really affect generations to come. And those kids that are going to college now, they're going to be able to have the education that they need to get their kids in college, if that's what they want to do. I mean, not every kid needs to go to college or wants to go to college. We're doing other things to help those kids.
Yes.
But for those that do, this is a generational type change, I think, and I was really honored to be part of it and to work with my colleagues in the Senate and colleagues in the House to get it done.
Well, thank you. As representing the Black press of America, we reach over somewhere between 25 and 30 million people a week in print. Now we have our own digital network and social media. This program has been live streamed live on social media today. Alabama, many would say, is a key to the Old South and a key to the New South.
Absolutely.
As a senator from Alabama, what's your perspective? 50% of all Black people still live in the South. Give us a forecast of 2020 and future. How do you see the empowerment of these communities that historically have been denied access, historically have been triaged, historically have been discriminated against? What's your forecast as the senator from Alabama? Do you see a new, more inclusive and diverse South rising that will help our nation go in a different direction?
Absolutely. I have said so many times in the campaign and as a senator, so many of the divisions that we see in this country started in the South. And the South can be the place of healing and bringing people back together. And I see tremendous opportunities in the South. Mm-hmm. I think my election in particular was something that people looked at as saying the South is changing. The demographics are changing to some extent, but I think people's hearts and minds are changing. And that's going to be the real key. And as long as we can get competitive with ideas and goals and things like that can get people talking. So far we went from a one-party state in Alabama with Democrats to a one-party state with Republicans. And there was never anything in between. You got to have competitive political parties. I think we're beginning to see that a lot in the South. And when you get competitive political parties, you get people that have to talk to each other in order to get things done. That's what we're seeing more and more. So I'm very, very hopeful. I see these new generations, the young people that are coming up. They don't have that same kind of biases and prejudices that folks my generation were brought up with. It's not the Jim Crow laws anymore. They were brought up in integrated schools in an integrated society. They were brought up caring for people and looking out for people. They want to make sure their kids are protected. Those are the things that cut across racial lines. And they also, I think, are beginning to see that, for instance, in a place like in Birmingham, that the state is better off when everybody in that state benefits from it. And it doesn't matter if a business comes into the Birmingham area or it comes down into Greene County or Macon County. It's going to benefit everyone. And the image of the state is changing. I think we helped change that in 2017. I think it's continuing. It's not going to be a process that you can just flip a switch. And quite frankly, it really shouldn't be. I think people have to learn and understand and get to know each other. But with the immigration issues and with the demographics changing, I have great hope for the South. I don't like to use the term New South anymore because it's been used for 40 or 50 years now. We're still waiting on it. But I do think there is a changing South, and I do think that the South can lead the nation in healing and where we are going to help benefit all people, regardless of their race, religion, or their gender.
Well, we want to focus on that certainly in our newspapers. We have the Birmingham Times in Alabama, the Greene County Democrat,
Right.
And also down in Mobile, we have a paper in Mobile, Alabama. And so this perspective, the reason why I wanted to know that answer to that question, thank you for giving us the answer, is that people are wondering, you know, there's not that much good news that comes out of Washington. And you seem to be saying that we can get things happening that improve the quality of life of our people to the extent to which we are bipartisan,
Right.
that you work together on both sides of the aisle.
Yes.
And you have been one of the senators to help pull that off. Now, sometimes you may get a little criticism for working on the other side, but I just want, if you could just talk a moment about the importance of having a bipartisan approach that rises above the partisan divide that seems to have Washington in a straitjacket.
Yeah, it's a great question because it's very important. We were able to accomplish a lot last year. The Future Act only got accomplished because of a bipartisan effort. That's very important to so many people. The National Defense Authorization, in which we got a 3.1% pay increase for military, as well as paid parental leave, 12 weeks of paid parental leave for all federal workers, which is going to incentivize people to work for the federal government, but to stay with the federal government. These young folks that are growing up, we can attract the best and the brightest. Those are bipartisan efforts. You really can't get anything accomplished in this town without a bipartisan effort. And that's the way it should be, where everyone gives and takes. You don't compromise your principles, but you can do something to make sure that the greater good is taken care of. And so that means that folks that are on the right and the left have to understand that you're not going to get everything. You know, the old Rolling Stones song, you can't always get what you want, but if you try real hard, you might find you get what you need. And that's the way I think people approach this up here. You know, and this town has become very partisan now, but quite frankly, the media sees more of the partisanship than they see of the bipartisanship. They see the dueling press conferences, as they see speeches on the floor in the Senate. They see tweets. Oh my Lord, we see the tweets. But the fact is, behind the scenes, what we're doing, we could not have accomplished our budgets. We couldn't have accomplished the NDAA and support for our great military. We could not have gotten the Future Act done. We could not have gotten all of those wonderful things that have happened at the end of the last year without bipartisan efforts. And that goes on a lot more than people really think. I think it's important for the media, especially the African American media, for folks to understand that we're all in this together, and those bipartisan efforts are so very important. And when they go to vote, it's easy to vote for someone who is going to be a checklist Democrat or a checklist Republican. What you really need to be looking for is who can get something done, who can talk to people and actually get things done. It may not get 100% of the things done that you want, but if you can get 80 or 90% of the things done that you want, or even 70%, that's better than none. And that's, I think, the key to the next election, is voting for people who can actually get things done.
Absolutely. Well, that's why I asked the question, and I know that we're going to have an exclusive one-on-one interview with you later on today. One of my award-winning reporters, Stacey Brown, is going to interview, and we're going to go a little bit deeper on the bipartisan issue. But that's one of the things that distinguishes the black press from the mainstream press. We want to dig deep into the substantive issues. Our people want to know what the future holds, and how we can work together in some way to open doors of economic opportunity, open doors where our young people can get the best education from K through 12, through college, through postgraduate. There's so much opportunity, and we need to close this gap. There's an achievement gap.
Absolutely.
That we need to work on, and we're working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to specifically work on closing the education gap. Can you just speak a little bit more about what you see in terms of federal government's policies to help close the achievement gap, the education gap that exists in so many of our communities?
Sure, I think that's a really complicated issue, and it deals with both education, training, and something as simple as getting broadband into these rural areas. We've got so many people in the state of Alabama, for instance, and across rural America, where so many of the African American population live, that don't have access to broadband. You know, broadband today is what electricity was in the 1930s. And so we're making a concerted effort to get broadband in there so these kids in rural Alabama have the same access to the educational opportunities that kids in Birmingham or Mobile or Huntsville. That's one simple part of that. Mm-hmm. The other part, dealing with Pell Grants, dealing with FAFSA, trying to simplify, making sure that people have the opportunities to get into a four-year college. But it's a little bit more than that too, because there's a lot of young people in today's world that can benefit from career and technical training. They don't necessarily need that four-year college degree right out of high school. We want to make sure they have a good high school experience. We want to get them the education. But coming out of that, there are so many, for instance, manufacturers in Alabama that could use those young people on the floor of their manufacturing facilities. Those manufacturing facilities are not like the days when I worked out at U.S. Steel in Birmingham, where it was hot, it was sweaty, it was dirty, it was dangerous. These are amazing facilities. We have a huge manufacturing segment in Alabama of automobile manufacturing, Honda, Hyundai, Mercedes-Benz. Working in those facilities gives people not only an opportunity for an advancement, but coming right out of it, a really good living with really good benefits. And it still gives people the opportunity later to further their educational career. One of the things that we've encouraged as I go around the state with businesses in Alabama is to not just depend on the state or the federal government to help educate kids. Develop their own apprenticeships. Reach into these schools and try to develop some apprenticeship programs where you can bring these kids in at an early age, start to train them, get them interested in manufacturing and working in those jobs. It's a really broad brush, I think, with so many things. But I think if we can do that and we can hit both rural and urban areas, that achievement gap can narrow significantly and give everybody the opportunity. We want to give more Pell Grants monies, expand those Pell Grants. We want to make sure that folks have that opportunity. And again, as crazy as it sounds, simplifying that FAFSA form could really help so many students in the state of Alabama and elsewhere across the country.
Very good. As I was listening to your response, I wanted to ask you now about employment, wages. One of the reasons why a lot of companies moved to Alabama was because they were low wages.
Right.
What do you see as increasing wage? There are debates now about the minimum wage. Where do you stand on employment and increasing wages?
Well, I'd like to see an increase in the minimum wage. I think it has to be stepped. I don't think you can go from the current wage at just over $7 an hour up to $15 overnight. But I do think it's important to step that. I think businesses can absorb that. Right now, I think businesses are looking for good employees, and they need to do the things to attract those good employees, and that is raising wages a good bit, getting folks the incentive to do the training, to do what's necessary. It's going to be difficult, I think, in the current makeup of Congress to get a minimum wage increase through Congress, but it's something that we really, I think, have to look at. Every study that I've seen, I know the drawbacks to it, but I just think American businesses are in a prime position right now, especially after the 2017 tax cut, where they've got money coming back in, and that money needs to be put back into both their investments in their plants and their facilities, but also employees. That's where I think we can invest. Alabama has had some companies that have done just that. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest banks in the state, raised the minimum wage right after that tax cut, and I applauded that in a big way. So I think there are things that we can do. It's just the political dynamics of the minimum wage are very difficult to navigate in a partisan world that we're living in right now. But I think companies on their own are seeing the value of increasing the incentives and increasing the wages for their workers, and not just the stockholders.
Yes.
You know, there was something that came out in the news fairly recently with a whole group of some of the biggest corporations, their CEOs, have now started to look at a much broader picture of the corporate responsibility that goes beyond just shareholder profits, and looking at the quality of life for their employees, not just the CEOs and their corporate elite, but the people that work for them, because that's what drives it. And so Alabama has traditionally had lower wages. I think that is improving, but it's a slow change, and I'd like to see it move faster.
Well, thank you. I think it is complicated, but we here understand that Fortune 500 companies have made more profit over the last couple of years than ever before, and we would like to see some of those profits get to the workers.
Absolutely.
That produce the profit. That's an intense having a living wage, not just a higher wage, but a wage that would enable families to take care of themselves.
Right.
A lot of people in our communities have to work more than one job, 2 or 3 jobs, just to make ends meet.
Absolutely.
And of course, that leads to the next question on wealth building. You know, poverty has been persistent in many of the communities in which we serve, that we report to, that we represent across the United States. It's just not in the South, it's
Right.
All over the country. What ideas that you have or proposals you have to help end poverty in America?
Well, that's, look, again, it's a complicated process. One of the things that I think we have to do a little bit better job of than what we've done in the past is that we need to give young people the financial literacy tools that they need. I don't think our schools are doing a really good job, and I don't think parents, quite frankly, have done a really great job of teaching kids financial literacy, understanding that you make a certain amount of money, you can only spend a certain amount of money. And the debt has grown, and we want to make sure we change that. I think educating folks and getting some financial literacy would really help build that wealth. It's not going to necessarily make somebody the next Bill Gates, but it could help that middle class. It could give them what they need to be stable, to build their families, to build their incomes. I think that's a huge step. Look, it all comes back, Doc, to education.
Right.
Everything just circles back to
Right.
education.
The NNPA, we're working now with Wells Fargo and other banks to try to improve financial literacy.
Right.
But financial literacy is not only for that one student, but it's for the family at large.
Absolutely.
You know, if one person in the family only has the information, we need everybody in the family to have the information and to receive the benefit of the education.
No question.
So we're going to be also focusing on that in 2020, because a lot of times, to be very honest with you, Senator, people say, well, I know my vote counts, but if I go out and vote in record numbers, how is that going to improve my quality of life? And so the economic development is connected to the political
Sure.
empowerment and vice versa. You know, politics and economics are not inseparable.
That's correct.
And that's why we have to work on all of these things, not sequentially, but simultaneously.
No question about it. No question about it. I think that if people can see, though, if they can look past the partisan rhetoric and look at what can actually be accomplished with health care and other things, they'll see that their vote can matter, and that's going to raise all boats. Health care in particular is an issue in rural Alabama. Yes. We've lost so many rural hospitals, something that we've been focused on. You know, and to show you the difference, for instance, in health care alone in Alabama, for years Alabama suffered from the Medicare wage index rule that kept Medicare dollars from coming back into Alabama. It came in at a very low reimbursement. For years, people were to write letters from the Alabama delegation. Well, Congresswoman Sewell and I, and along with Senator Shelby, finally got a meeting with CMS, and we've changed that. It's going to bring in $40–50 million to Alabama into those rural areas.
In 1 year's time?
Per year. Now, if we could expand Medicaid in Alabama, and I have been advocating that for a long time, we'd bring in billions of dollars back into Alabama, and it would not only bring in the money, it would help health care benefits. It would help the health of the state. Some 300,000 people would get health care that they don't have right now. Right. That also benefits. That helps that wage gap. That helps build communities. And when you can do all of those things, it does really take a lot of different people to pull these communities together. Education is a huge component. Healthcare is a huge component. That's what attracts those businesses in there.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Congresswoman Sewell. We work with her very closely from Selma.
Yep.
The Alabama Black Belt, you probably know Hankin Rose Sanders.
Oh, sure.
The Sanders family has been, and now I understand his daughter is a state senator.
Absolutely.
In Alabama. And that Black Belt of Alabama is one of those communities across multiple county lines where poverty is so persistent.
Yes.
And I think that on healthcare issues, on education issues, there's much more that could be done. But I'm glad to hear you say now that natives of Alabama will be able to get some of those federal dollars that we're not able to get in prior administrations.
Absolutely. And I think, I think one of the things that folks in the Black Belt areas and others, it goes back to, does your vote count? And for so long in Alabama, they have seen that, okay, my vote's just not going to count except on a very local basis. And so one of the things, I think the state of Alabama has neglected that entire area as a whole, and they've looked more toward Huntsville and Birmingham and Mobile. I think with my election, that Congresswoman Sewell's had a pretty good partner in the Senate, and
yes.
It took a partner in the Senate to really have a voice for, a great example, the water quality in those areas. I mean, sewer and sanitation issues are they're really bad in places of the Black Belt areas. We've been able, working with Congresswoman Sewell and others, we've been able to get hundreds of millions of dollars in grant monies that are available now to help folks with their septic tanks, the sewage systems, so that they can build that up. And again, that goes directly to the health of folks, not to mention just their overall quality of life and sense of well-being.
Right. Well, for our listeners, since people around the country are listening, when we describe the geographical area of Alabama, the Black Belt, I just want you to know there's a Black Belt in Mississippi, there's
Sure.
a Black Belt in South Carolina, there's a Black Belt in Georgia, there's a
Right.
Black Belt in North Carolina, Mount, and all of these places where African Americans are concentrated,
Yes.
you have these inequities.
Absolutely.
You have these systemic inequities, and we need people like you, Senator, and Congresswoman. And I'm so glad of the work that the NNPA is doing now with the Congressional Black Caucus,
Absolutely.
led by the Honorable Karen Bass, Democrat of California, to try to address some of these issues. Beyond what's on Twitter or beyond what's on the headline in the mainstream press, we really want to focus on those issues that improve the quality of life of our community.
Right.
And all of these issues are so very important. There's one issue we haven't talked about yet I just want to get you to comment on, and that is environmental issues, climate change issues, environmental justice. We had a little something to do many years about creating and establishing the environmental justice movement. Mm-hmm. Tell me what's happening in Alabama in terms of environmental concerns and how environmental concerns is connected also to quality of life issues.
Sure. We just recently did a roundtable on this very issue, environmental justice, down in Selma. Had a great panel with both state officials, local officials, and federal officials that talked about the challenges that we face. And it goes from environmental justice all the way to the climate issues that we're facing daily. I think what we talked about just recently, just a minute ago, with the sewers and the water quality, yes. There are places in those areas where folks are just straight piping sewer into the woods. There are septic tanks that are not adequate in these communities. We've done a lot to try to focus on that and to get monies to do that. And that really changes because there's a lot of health issues that are going to be related to some of that. In Alabama, in Birmingham in particular, Congresswoman Sewell and I in particular have been very vocal about getting the current EPA to give another look at designating North Birmingham as a Superfund site. They have backed off of that, and those are areas that at one time were in the heart of manufacturing, dirty manufacturing at the time, and it has created such an environmental issue in North Birmingham and for those communities that are overwhelmingly now African American. And the EPA currently doesn't seem to want to come in and do an awful lot for it. There's been a lot of controversy about that. There's been some criminal cases that have resulted from that. People have gone to prison, and they're still looking at maybe going to prison. So we've been very vocal in trying to bring that to the attention of folks. And I think that that's one of the biggest things that your organization can continue to do with folks like Congresswoman Sewell and I, and that is to continue to put this on the radar,
yes,
to continue to call things out as environmental justice and racial environmental justice. And I think we've done a much better job of doing that. I know we have in the 2 years since I've been elected. We've still got a long way to go, and the whole climate change issue is going to affect Alabama in a big way, whether it's the coastal towns or those farmers that are having to adjust with everything that we see going on.
Right. I just want to dig a little deeper. When our communities are disproportionately exposed to these environmental hazards, it also causes, it contributes to learning disabilities.
Absolutely.
So a young kid is not only exposed to lead poisoning, but now impurities in the water system, mm-hmm, impurities in the air. You really cut short not only the lifespan of people, you cut short their ability to maximize their God-given gifts and talents.
Absolutely.
And so we want to work with you. We would like to also focus on the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. I know some good people that work over there in those companies, in those administrations, but we need to focus. And I think Alabama and the Deep South is still a place where a lot of work still needs to be done.
Oh, there's no question about that. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. Traditionally, I think environmental enforcement in Alabama and some of the other southern states has been lacking. And it was real easy to not enforce the way they did because of the racial dynamics involved. I think that's changing, but it's going to require continuing to talk, because I don't have as much confidence in the EPA under this administration to do those things that are absolutely necessary. We've got those issues in North Birmingham with sewer. We've got the PFAS issues in North Alabama, all of which we've just got to continue to bring to the forefront and make not only the federal officials, but get those state and local officials, because they're on the front lines too. The local county officials need to be talking to the state officials in Montgomery, and the state officials in Montgomery need to be talking up here where there are even more resources.
Well, some of these issues are also interstate. And again,
absolutely,
one of the highlights of the passage of the Future Act, which you were very much involved in, was your colleague, Republican Senator from Tennessee,
yes,
Senator Lamar Alexander. That was a good model to see a Democratic senator and Republican senator work together that's going to do something to benefit the African American community.
Absolutely.
And I'm saying if you can do that in education, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to some of your colleagues to get them to focus on what I would say is life-threatening challenges dealing with these environmental inequities, yes, because it impairs how people live the rest of their lives. It's just so critical.
I agree with that. And we're working to try to do that. It gets complicated when you're talking about the businesses and those kind of things, but I think people are beginning to see that. And I think that is a good example of the work we did with Lamar. You know, Tim Scott, African-American senator from South Carolina.
From South Carolina, was very much involved also.
He was involved in that, yes, as well as the heirs property that, yes, we did for African-American farmers and the inequities that they have suffered over generations these days. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. We've just got so much political noise, yes, out there right now. And I think more and more, even going into a political year, if we can just get past that and talk about the pros and the cons. And again, there's going to be two sides. There's going to be different. We're going to come at it maybe at a little bit different angles, but the object ought to be the same, and that is the betterment for everyone and to move forward. And I think if we can do that, we can have great success.
You a very important subject you touched on. I just want you to elaborate a little bit. What's the future of farming in America? Not only for African American farmers, but for Latinos, for Asians, for white farmers.
Right.
Farming. The United States used to be one of the agricultural giants of the world.
Yeah.
Now we seem to be struggling to find ways to maintain a livelihood for farmers, agribusiness. I'm talking
Yeah.
about, when I say farmers, I mean the small family-owned
Yes.
farms, not the large
It's under
agribusiness.
the small business, the farmers that we've been used to in Alabama and elsewhere are under constant threat. Not only is it a tough business to begin with, because you're at the mercy of God with regard to weather and things like this. Now you've seen tariffs that have, and retaliatory tariffs that have hurt so many of our farmers. But it's that conglomeration, that agribusiness, that makes it even more and more difficult. We've been trying to do things in the Farm Bill to keep the correct protections for the small farmers, for cotton farmers, for soybean farmers on the smaller level. We've had some success, but clearly there is a lot of work that I think has to be done. We have to be very careful. But having those markets is a real key. We grow enough food to really feed so many people around the world, but you've got to have those markets, and we're going to be competing with other markets now. You know, we've lost markets in China because of the tariff war. They're going to go, for instance, to South America to start buying soybeans. So those markets may or may not come back. And farmers across America, they don't want handouts. They're not looking for that. They want markets. They want to be able to do the things that they've done for generations. I think the heirs property legislation that Tim and I worked on is going to be a good step to help at least African American farmers maintain and get those farm numbers that they've not been able to do for a long time. But it is going to be a difficult situation, and we've got to start looking 2 and 3 steps ahead. But the markets are the key, and that involves a global market and international trade that we've got to keep our eyes on. And I've not been a proponent of the president's trade wars as much as anything because of how it's affected farmers in Alabama.
Well, we want to work with you on that issue. It's an ongoing issue. I see by the clock we've got about 5 minutes left. So I just want you to say to our audience, Senator, how important do you see the black press of America, not only in Alabama but across the country?
Well, I think look, I think the press in general is critical, and I have been. Let's talk a minute about the overall media that I, quite frankly, I'm a little disappointed in. Mainstream media seems to be more after ratings and entertainment than they are news and informing people. I think that the black press has a unique role because you can maintain that presence and not necessarily be looking for the quick hit or the click online as much as it is informing people. It is critical to make sure that people are not only informed, they're engaged. You can do that by informing people, you can get them engaged. And I am really hopeful that the black press and across this country can stay focused on the issues that are so important and not get bogged down in the partisanship as much, but focusing on those issues that are critical, not just to the United States of America, not just to the state of North Carolina or the state of Alabama, but to the local folks, the kitchen tables across America where those black families are sitting down every night and they're wondering about their health care. They're wondering about where their next job is going to be. They're wondering if they can make enough money so that they don't have to have 2 jobs. Those are the kind of things that I think the critical part of the black press is. That is what I think you do such a wonderful job at, is staying focused on issues and news that are critical to the communities that you serve. And so I commend you for that. And I hope that you will continue that effort and not get, not succumb to the pressures of some of the other media to just go for the entertainment and the shock value that we see so many times where people stay in their silos, political silos, as opposed to issue silos.
Well, thank you very much. You know, the black press, we've been around since 1827.
Right.
So 2020 marks the 193rd year
Wow.
of the black press of America. And we're pleased that you are our first United States Senator in a series of interviews that we're going to be doing here on the Senate side to get the word out to black America and through the black press, but also to America in general. And your voice is an important voice.
Right.
Your voice has been a strong voice, and we wish you well. We know that you got another election coming up. Voter turnout is going to be extremely important in Alabama in 2020. Voter turnout is going to be extremely important across the United States of America. I think our nation is somewhat at a crossroads.
Right.
And hopefully we will go forward. all of the issues, there's one remaining issue that we did not cover, and before we end, I just want you to comment quickly on the importance of veterans. My father was a veteran of World War I, and I was raised up in a household that gave the importance of men and women serving the country.
Right.
And of course, as we do this interview, we have thousands of our soldiers being deployed now back to the Middle East. Give a closing word on your message as United States Senator to the veterans, and particularly to black veterans who are serving in our nation's armed services.
Well, my message to them is just thank you. Thank you for the service that you've given to the country, and I'm going to do everything I can to continue showing the appreciation that they deserve. We've done that, I think, last year. We were looking at veterans' homes, veterans' health care. We eliminated the military widows tax. That was such an important thing for us to get done, and it's an amazing thing that Congress let that lapse. So I think our commitment, we've got to demonstrate our commitment in more ways than just talking about it, in more ways than just simply going to a Veterans Memorial or a Veterans Day ceremony and saluting and talking about it. We've got to put our words into actions and to make sure that we recognize the commitment that we have. And so I just stand with everybody. I'm concerned about what's going on in the world today. Mm-hmm. I think this administration owes the people of the United States and our military families explanations about what they're doing. If they're going to send folks into harm's way, we need to know why. And we need to have as much as we can, knowing that there's some classified information that they can't do. But if I've got Alabama families, men and women that are going to go be deployed over there, they need to know that they're fighting for the right reason and that there's an explanation about what they're doing. I'm going to be working hard to do that. And I'm going to be working hard to continue that voice for the African American community. And I want to end on this. When we talk about the right to vote,
yes,
I'm the only Democratic senator from the Deep South, the only one. We need more. You know, that we have members of Congress who are African American from the Deep South, but they need partners in the United States Senate. And those don't have to be African American. They can be white folks like me, but we need those voices. We need people in there. And that's why that's so important to get engaged and get out to vote, because it may take a little bit, but those voices are going to be there. It took a while in Alabama to get this voice, but we're going to stay there. We're going to do everything we can to stay there and to try to get more colleagues.
Well, look, I want to close out with a handshake.
Thank you.
Honored to shake your hand. Thank you for giving us this live interview. May God bless you. God bless the state of Alabama. And may God bless America.
Thank you. Thank you.